Let's be clear about something right away. This isn't about calling people out. It's about calling ourselves up. Because bad people don't always show up as villains. Sometimes they wear suits. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they lead companies, teams, even families. So what makes someone bad? Not disagreement, not imperfection, not having a bad day. What makes someone bad is repeated behavior that lacks integrity, empathy, and responsibility, especially when it costs others. Here are 8 signs to pay attention to, not in others only, but in ourselves. Because leadership starts with self-awareness. 1, they never take ownership. When something goes wrong, it's always someone else's fault. They deflect, they blame, they disappear from accountability. They love the spotlight when things go well, but when failure shows up, they vanish or point fingers. True character shows not in success, but in how you handle mistakes. Bad people don't learn. They deflect to protect their ego. 2, they use people, not serve them. Relationships are transactional. They'll praise you when they need you and forget you when they don't. They don't connect, they calculate. To them, people are stepping stones, not partners. Trust becomes currency, and once they've spent it, they move on without guilt. 3, they manipulate with charm. They know exactly what to say to make people feel good, but it's not sincerity, it's strategy. Charm is their tool to gain influence, not build trust. And when you see behind the curtain, the warmth disappears and the control begins. They speak of values, but their actions betray them. 4, they gossip to divide, not unite. They don't confront people directly. They sow seeds of doubt quietly. They weaponize information, twist narratives, and create alliances based on shared negativity. They don't want clarity, they want control of the narrative. Gossip is their currency for dominance. 5, they never apologize genuinely. And if they do say sorry, it's usually followed by but. Their apologies are about appearance, not repair. They're more concerned with damage control than healing. A real apology requires humility. Bad people see apology as weakness, not strength. 6, they make you question your worth. You leave conversations with them feeling smaller. They subtly undermine your confidence, your ideas, your energy, your contribution. They don't critique to help, they criticize to control. Their presence doesn't build you, it drains you. That's not feedback, that's manipulation. 7, they lack empathy but demand loyalty. They expect others to show up, stay late, sacrifice, but when it's their turn to care, they're absent. They demand loyalty but don't reciprocate it. They see compassion as optional and performance as everything. Empathy is not weakness, it's the foundation of trust. But bad people see it as a distraction. 8, they chase power over purpose. They care more about being right than doing what's right. They obsess over control, status, and influence. But forget the reason any of it matters. People. They'll bend values to protect their position. They don't lead, they dominate. And domination isn't leadership, it's fear in disguise. Now the truth is, we're all capable of these behaviors. That's why this isn't a checklist to judge others. It's a mirror to hold up to ourselves. Because the worst kind of bad is when we stop being curious about who we're becoming. Are we leading with ego or empathy? Are we protecting image or pursuing truth? Are we serving people or using them? This isn't about being perfect, it's about being accountable. Because the most dangerous people in any room are the ones who never ask, Could I be the problem? Bad isn't always like. Bad character hides behind charm and manipulation. Charm is powerful, it's magnetic, persuasive, often disarming. It draws people in with ease, builds quick rapport, and creates a sense of warmth and connection that feels real. But the truth is, charm isn't always rooted in sincerity. It can be a tool, sometimes a weapon, and when someone's character is lacking, charm becomes a shield that hides deeper dysfunction. It becomes the costume that bad behavior wears so it can go unnoticed. We're wired to respond positively to charm. A well-timed compliment, a knowing smile, a confident tone. They make us feel seen and valued. It feels personal. It feels genuine. That's why charm is so effective. But charm without character is manipulation. It's performance. It's calculated influence. People who use charm to hide their intentions aren't interested in connection. They're interested in control. They study what gets attention, what earns trust, and they mirror it not because it reflects their values, but because it gets results. When someone with bad character uses charm, it's often to bypass scrutiny. They'll say all the right things, show up at the right moments, perform the right gestures. They'll make you laugh. They'll praise your ideas. They'll know exactly how to make you feel important. But pay attention to the patterns. Do their actions align with their words? Do they treat others with the same respect behind closed doors? Do they show consistency even when there's no audience? Bad character eventually leaks through the cracks, no matter how charming the surface appears. You'll start to notice subtle shifts, passive-aggressive comments, dismissive behavior, moments where they twist the truth just enough to make themselves look better. But because they're so likable, you second-guess yourself. You tell yourself, they didn't mean it, that maybe you misread the tone. That's part of the manipulation. The charm buys them credibility so that when their character slips, you give them the benefit of the doubt. That's how manipulation works. It doesn't come in obvious forms. It doesn't look like a threat or a demand. It looks like connection. It sounds like concern. It often shows up as flattery. But underneath it all is a strategy, a desire to gain something, status, access, power, without earning it, honestly. Manipulators don't want mutual relationships. They want leverage. And charm is how they gain it. Manipulative charmers don't need to lie to be deceptive. In fact, they often tell partial truths, carefully chosen to shape your perception without giving you the full picture. They use tone, timing, and selective vulnerability to seem open, even when they're hiding entire parts of their intent. They might even share a flaw or two to seem relatable. But those admissions are chosen. They're rehearsed. They're not about being authentic. They're about appearing authentic. The difference between real character and performative charm becomes clearer over time. People with good character don't need to charm you. They own your trust through consistency. They do what they say. They own their mistakes. They treat people with dignity, not just when it benefits them, but because it reflects who they are. Their influence is built on reliability, not performance. But someone hiding behind charm will become increasingly difficult to pin down. You'll feel like you're always one step behind. You'll sense something's off, but struggle to explain it. That's intentional. Manipulators create confusion so they can control the narrative. They reframe situations to suit their image. They tell different stories to different people and call it diplomacy. What they're actually doing is distorting reality to stay in power. In professional settings, this can be especially dangerous. A charming person with bad character can rise quickly, gain influence, and earn trust from the top down. But behind the scenes, they leave a trail of undermined colleagues, broken trust, and emotional exhaustion. They might never raise their voice or break the rules, but they erode morale, pit people against each other, and protect their position at the expense of the team. They lead with performance, not purpose. Charm also gives them an advantage in conflict. If they're ever confronted, they'll use their social credibility to cast doubt on the accuser. They'll shift blame, play victim, or minimize the issue altogether. They're skilled at reframing. They'll say things like, "You misunderstood me," or "You're overreacting," not because they're unaware, but because they're unwilling to take responsibility. They know exactly what they're doing. And charm is how they deflect accountability. One of the hardest things about dealing with a charming manipulator is the isolation it creates, because they've likely charmed others too. You start to feel like the only one who sees the truth. You question yourself. You hesitate to speak up. That's the trap. Manipulation thrives in silence. And charm keeps that silence in place because no one wants to believe that someone so nice could be so harmful underneath. Recognizing this pattern requires more than logic, it requires intuition. You have to pay attention to how you feel after interactions. Do you feel heard or subtly dismissed? Uplifted or quietly diminished? Are you second-guessing your instincts more often than before? Those feelings are signals. Trust them. Charm may win the first impression, but character shows up in the long run. Look for consistency, humility, and how they treat people who can't offer them anything in return. It's also important to distinguish between natural charisma and strategic charm. Not all charming people are manipulative. Some people are warm, funny, and genuinely magnetic because that's who they are. The difference is that real charisma doesn't demand trust, it earns it. It doesn't manipulate situations, it brings clarity. It doesn't perform empathy, it lives it. Bad character hides behind charm because charm is easier than integrity. It's quicker. It doesn't require sacrifice or reflection. It gets results without requiring change. But real leadership, real impact, can't be built on that foundation. Because eventually, the truth comes through. People start to talk. Trust begins to erode. And what was once captivating becomes exhausting. So when you feel drawn to someone's charm, slow down. Watch how they act when no one's watching. Notice how they respond when challenged. Pay attention to how they talk about others when they're not in the room. That's where the truth lives. Not in the highlight reel, but in the quiet moments where image doesn't matter. Because it's easy to impress people for a moment. It's much harder to lead with integrity for a lifetime. A lack of accountability reveals true intentions. There's something telling about how people respond when things go wrong. When pressure mounts, when mistakes are made, when plans don't go as expected, it's in those moments that someone's real values surface. Not in the polished speeches, not in the well-curated social presence, but in the silence that follows a failure. Accountability isn't just about saying, "I did it." It's about owning your choices, your impact, your ripple effect on the people around you. And when someone consistently refuses to do that, it tells you everything you need to know. People who avoid accountability often carry an obsession with control, not the kind that creates stability, but the kind that protects image. They'd rather preserve how they're perceived than address the reality of their behavior. When something goes wrong, their first instinct is to protect their ego. That might mean blaming others, redirecting attention, making excuses, or pretending it didn't happen. The common denominator is this: they prioritize themselves over the truth. And that tells you their intention isn't growth, it's self-preservation. There's a difference between making a mistake and hiding from one. Everyone stumbles, everyone miscalculates. But accountability is about what you do after the fall. Do you deflect or reflect? Do you bury it or do you confront it? Do you look people in the eye and say, "That's on me," or do you manipulate the narrative to minimize your role? People who lack accountability often have a polished way of appearing responsible without ever truly owning anything. They might say things like, "I'm sorry you feel that way," or "That wasn't my intention." But those statements are hollow. They protect the speaker, not the relationship. The absence of accountability creates a vacuum where trust dies. When someone avoids responsibility, they force others to carry the emotional weight of the situation. Instead of resolution, there's tension. Instead of closure, there's confusion. And over time, that pattern chips away at psychological safety. Teams stop speaking up. Friends stop being honest. Partners stop being vulnerable. Because what's the point of bringing something up if the other person will never truly hear it? A person's willingness to be accountable is one of the strongest indicators of their character. Not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Accountability requires humility. It means acknowledging that you are flawed, that you don't have all the answers, that your actions impact others in ways you may not intend. It means facing discomfort without running from it. It means staying in the room when the conversation gets uncomfortable. People who lack that willingness aren't just avoiding responsibility, they're revealing a lack of respect for those around them. And here's the subtle part. People who dodge accountability often do it with charm, intelligence, and confidence. They know how to speak just enough truth to escape consequences, but not enough to bring healing. They reframe situations with just enough logic to sound reasonable, but not enough honesty to be transformative. They don't take ownership. They take control of the narrative. They manage perception instead of addressing reality. And they do it so smoothly that it can take a long time to notice the pattern. Eventually, though, the pattern becomes clear. You notice that every conflict seems to end with you apologizing. You notice that they never admit when they're wrong unless it's a minor detail they can afford to concede. You notice that problems linger not because they're unsolvable, but because one person refuses to meet you in the truth. And what becomes most painful is not the mistake itself, but the gaslighting, the avoidance, the erosion of shared honesty. That's what accountability protects: the relationship, the mission, the truth. In organizations, the absence of accountability can look like a culture of silence. People stop challenging ideas. Feedback loops break down. People nod in meetings but vent in private. Leaders might claim they value transparency, but when mistakes are exposed, they punish instead of partner. In that environment, people learn to protect themselves, not improve. Innovation slows. Morale suffers. And the organization might grow on the outside, but inside it starts to rot. In friendships, a lack of accountability often shows up as recurring tension. You keep having the same arguments. You keep forgiving the same behavior. You keep lowering your expectations because it's easier than confronting the truth. They don't change because they don't take responsibility. They apologize with words but not with action. They remember their feelings but forget your pain. Over time, the relationship becomes more about managing their behavior than sharing life together. And in leadership, this trait is especially dangerous. A leader who refuses accountability can do serious damage, not just to results, but to people's lives. They lead from a place of fear and ego. They value being right more than being honest. They deflect blame downward, take credit upward, and create a culture where mistakes are seen as threats instead of opportunities. People don't grow under that kind of leadership. They survive. And that survival costs them creativity, confidence, and connection. Accountability isn't just about answering to others. It's about being honest with yourself. Are you willing to admit when you got it wrong? Are you open to hearing how you've affected someone else, even when it hurts? Can you stay present in the discomfort long enough to grow from it? That's the work. That's the muscle. And if someone doesn't have that muscle, no amount of talent, charisma, or intelligence can make up for it. It's easy to say the words, "I take full responsibility." But accountability isn't about saying the right thing. It's about showing up differently afterward. It's about repairing what was broken. It's about asking, what can I do to make this right? And then actually doing it. It's about doing the hard, invisible work of reflection. And more than anything, it's about making sure the people affected by your actions feel seen, heard, and respected. What makes a person trustworthy isn't their ability to avoid mistakes. It's their ability to face them head on. People who are accountable aren't perfect, but they're real, they're courageous, they create safety, not suspicion. You know where you stand with them because they're not afraid to admit where they stand themselves. In a world obsessed with performance, accountability is still the most human skill we can practice. Not because it's glamorous, but because it's real. And in the end, reality is what we need most. Leadership in its purest form is an act of service. It's not about commanding others to act. It's about inspiring them to believe. True leadership begins with understanding, not authority. It requires a deep human connection that says, I see you, I hear you. Without empathy, leadership becomes hollow. It becomes about results at the expense of people. It becomes performance without purpose. And when empathy is stripped away, what remains is control. A rigid, fearful, transactional grip on power that erodes trust, creativity, and morale. Empathy is not softness. It's not letting people off the hook. It's not about avoiding hard conversations or lowering standards. Empathy is about meeting people where they are before asking them to move. It's about understanding what drives them, what challenges them, what fuels or drains their energy. When leaders lose touch with that, they start managing outputs instead of leading humans. They become more interested in compliance than connection, more invested in optics than impact. Without empathy, leadership begins to feel like pressure. There's an invisible weight in the room. People start watching their words, avoiding risk, and shrinking in the presence of authority. The psychological safety disappears, and with it goes innovation. Teams don't push boundaries because they fear failure. People don't speak up because they fear being misunderstood or dismissed. And that fear slowly replaces motivation. Control becomes the dominant force, not inspiration, not shared purpose. just the desire to stay out of trouble. Leader without empathy tends to default to systems, rules, and routines to get things done. Structure isn't bad. Structure brings clarity. But when structure replaces curiosity, people feel boxed in. They stop feeling seen as individuals. Everything becomes standardized. Performance reviews become checklists. Meetings become monologues. Feedback becomes top-down. Empathy asks questions. Control issues command. And over time, people stop offering their hearts and start offering only what's required. There's a difference between authority and influence. Authority comes with the title. Influence is earned. It comes from listening, understanding, and investing in people. Without empathy, a leader may still hold authority, but they lose influence. They may get results in the short term, but they won't build loyalty. People might obey them, but they won't follow them. They might get compliance, but never commitment. And the moment that leader's position is threatened, their grip tightens, not because they're strong, but because they're afraid. Empathy gives a leader the ability to see beyond performance metrics and into the human experience. When someone on the team is struggling, empathy doesn't assume laziness. It asks what's going on. It creates space for honesty, not punishment. It turns conflict into understanding. Without empathy, a struggling team member becomes a liability, not a human being. Their worth gets measured only by their latest output, not by their potential or contribution over time. That kind of leadership isn't sustainable. It burns people out and leaves them questioning their value. Leaders who lack empathy often confuse control for clarity. They believe that strict processes, constant oversight, and rigid expectations create accountability. But control isn't clarity. It's fear management. Real clarity comes from conversations, from context, from inviting others into the why. Empathy takes time. It asks leaders to slow down, to listen, to reflect. But in the long run, it builds trust that makes everything else faster. Trust reduces friction. Control amplifies it. Empathy is also the root of courage in leadership. Without it, leaders become reactive. They interpret disagreement as defiance, mistakes as incompetence, and vulnerability as weakness. Empathy allows leaders to hear hard truths without being threatened. It helps them stay curious in conflict. It enables them to coach instead of criticize. A leader with empathy isn't afraid of emotion. They know how to navigate it. They create environments where people can be both human and high-performing. A team that's led with empathy feels it. There's a tone to the culture. People are more open, more collaborative, more resilient. They give each other the benefit of the doubt. They push each other not out of fear, but out of shared ambition. Empathy unlocks the deeper layers of motivation, purpose, pride, connection. Without it, all that's left is compliance, which is fragile and shallow. People do just enough to not get in trouble. They stop caring. They check out. Control may feel like safety to a leader who's afraid of failure, of criticism, of uncertainty, but that control chokes the very thing they need most: buy-in. Buy-in doesn't come from policies. It comes from people knowing their voice matters. It comes from feeling understood even when they're not agreed with. Empathy is what turns accountability into growth instead of guilt. It's what makes feedback a gift instead of a weapon. When empathy is missing, power becomes the measure of success. Leaders start chasing authority, status, and recognition instead of outcomes that matter. They become more focused on being right than doing right. Their ego becomes more central than the mission. They start seeing their team as tools to be managed, not individuals to be developed. In that environment, morale doesn't just drop, it disappears. And eventually, so do the people. Leadership without empathy also struggles to evolve, because growth requires feedback, and feedback requires trust. If people don't feel safe to speak up, the leader never gets better. They stay stuck in their own perspective. They assume silence means agreement, when in reality it often means fear. Empathy opens the door to learning. It allows leaders to hear what's unsaid, to read between the lines, to lead not just from the head, but from the heart. Empathy isn't about letting people do whatever they want. It's about understanding why they do what they do. It's about knowing the difference between a bad day and a bad attitude, between a mistake and a mindset. It helps leaders make decisions that are not only effective but ethical, not only productive but people-centered. Empathy doesn't weaken leadership, it humanizes it. And in a world where people are longing to be seen and heard, that's not optional anymore. The absence of empathy in leadership doesn't always show up dramatically. Sometimes it's subtle. It's in the tone of an email, the way someone's concerns are brushed aside, the sigh in a one-on-one, the lack of eye contact, the rushed feedback, the silence after someone shares something hard. Empathy is rarely loud, but its absence is deeply felt. When a leader leads without empathy, they may still get compliance, performance, and even results, but they won't get loyalty. They won't get honesty. They won't get the invisible currency that holds great teams together, trust. And without trust, all leadership becomes is a balancing act of pressure and performance, held together by fear instead of belief.